Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar about the possibilities how the graphical user interface may be customized. My name is Katarina Bolemant, and today we will look closer on changes made in MidPoint 4.4 called Tesla. We will see the basic structure for making the customizations, the mechanism how the merging and customizations work will be explained, and at the end we will see also some examples in action. In MidPoint 4.4, called Tesla, graphical user interface was significantly changed. The biggest changes are related to displaying object details page. In previous versions, we used tabs as a basic navigation and a different information about the objects, such as there was a tab for basic properties showing username, email address, first name, last name, and so on. Then there were different tabs for showing assignments, projections, delegations, and so on. While extending and adding more functionality to graphical user interface, we quickly ran into this situation with tabs in tabs in tabs. And it started to be very complex and difficult to maintain at least a good user experience. Therefore, in Tesla, we decided to change the design and replace the tabs with the details navigation menu. The benefit is that the details navigation menu is fully configurable, and it depends on the specific requirements and environment, how long it will be and what everything will be shown. This also brings better modularity and the possibility to keep the presented information simple. Flexible configuration for the details navigation menu enables, for example, hiding some menu items, adding your own menu items, changing the icon, label, and ordering of the menu items, as we will see later in the webinar. The main structure for configuring and adapting the user interface to your needs is admin GUI configuration type. The basic structure contains, for example, the possibility to add custom menu links pointing the user to other services in your deployment using additional menu link, the possibility to configure shortcuts links placed on the end user dashboard using a user dashboard link configuration option, the possibility to influence sidebar menu items with configuring object collection views, the possibility to influence what and how it is displayed on details pages using object details configuration options, and many more. For all options, please see the documentation available at docs.evolveum.com. In this webinar, we will look closer at how these customizations work. More specifically, we will look how the object details can be configured and how the customization works in the background. At the beginning, we need a little bit of theory. The configuration for the user interface can be defined in different objects, such as system configuration object, all role-like objects of role services organizations, and partially, it can be defined in the archetype, more specifically in the archetype policy part. This brings a flexible mechanism for customizing the graphical user interface that allows to be adapted to the logged-in users according to their assignments. But how will MidPoint behave with different configurations for the graphical user interface in different objects? How will MidPoint know when the configuration should be merged, overridden, added? The answer is simple. We need to have an identifier defined for these configurations. Therefore, since 4.4, the identifier attribute is mandatory and is used exactly for the merging purposes. And how does the mechanism work? So, the first part of the merging mechanism is performed while a user is logging in. After successful authentication, we have enough information about the user and their roles. Therefore, we can compile and merge the customizations from the system configuration object, all role-like objects, and also system-defined defaults. As first, customizations from the system configuration object is taken and considered as a default configuration. Further, If the user has any roles assigned, the admin GUI configuration from all of them is collected and applied on top of one from the system configuration. After admin GUI configuration from all the roles is applied, the system default configuration is applied to it. While applying the customization from the roles, these customizations can be considered as stronger than the one defined in system configuration object. This means that in the case that the customization for same feature with the same identifier is present in the system configuration object as in the role custom configuration will override the one from the system configuration object. This also applies for the merging of admin GUI configuration defined in different roles. Therefore, you should be careful while spreading the admin GUI configuration to different roles. All the configurations in roles must be additional one to another, otherwise unexpected behavior might be observed. Because there is no guarantee that the order will be the same every time while merging admin GUI configuration from the roles. After all these steps are applied, the result is the so-called compiled user profile, which can be used during the user's whole session. You might have noticed before that after changing the configuration for user interface in system configuration object or role, you have to log out and log in for the configuration to take effect. It is influenced by the fact that we compile as much as possible while logging in for users to avoid an unnecessary request to the database and to speed up the rendering for the graphical user interface. Let's have a closer look at the example how this mechanism works in real world. In the picture, we can see configuration for focus cases in role B, role A, and system-defined default configuration. Configuration for focus cases in role B and role A are in conflict because both of them want to set label and display order to different values. What is the result? In this case, we simulate that the role B is processed by the merging mechanism, followed by processing role A, and at the end, the system defaults are appended. As we can see at the bottom in the picture, the merge configuration for focus cases will contain the label and display order from role A configuration. It is because the role A was processed after role B. In the second example, we see the same role A and role B with the same configurations, but processed another time and in another order. As you can see in the picture below, merge configuration is different as it was before. Therefore, be careful and keep in mind that your configuration spread to different roles must be commutative. I've already mentioned that it is also possible to put the customization for the user interface in the archetype object, more specifically into the archetype policy part. For now, the configuration is limited to object details page customizations. And you probably noticed that while explaining the merging mechanism before, I didn't mention archetypes. And you are right and a good listener. The customizations for the user interface from the archetypes are merged later when opening the details of an object. Are you wondering why? So the main reason is that we know the archetype-based customizations only when the concrete object details are shown. The information about the object's archetype is in the object's assignment. When the concrete object is going to be opened and its details will be displayed, we take the precompiled user profile constructed during the logging in, and on top of that, we apply the configuration from the archetype. The same mechanism is used as with roles, and so archetype configuration will override the previously merged configuration. Customizations from archetype objects are applied every time the object's details are requested Therefore, it might not be needed to re-log in after the configuration is changed in archetypes. In Tesla, the design of the object details page was reworked in presumption of better user experience and flexibility for customizations. When we open the object details page, we can see logical blocks, each of them outlined in color. In the picture, we see 4 blocks: a summary panel, action buttons, a details navigation menu, and a details view panel. Besides action buttons, all the other parts are configurable and can be adjusted to concrete requirements. So let's take a closer look at how the configuration might look. First of all, when we are going to customize the look and feel for any object details page, we need to specify for which type the configuration should take an effect. For example, is the configuration meant to apply for users, roles, services? The type is mandatory, and in this concrete case, it is also used by the merging mechanism. So the configuration for the details of a user can be merged together from system configuration object, all role-like objects, and from archetypes. When you want to customize the summary panel on the details page of the object, you will need to use a summary panel structure. For customizing a details navigation menu together with the details view panel, you need to use a panel structure. What exactly does it mean that the summary panel can be customized? In the picture, you can see all the configuration options for summary panel. It is possible to write custom scripts to achieve the desired presentation. And what about the panel configuration? How exactly can a details navigation menu and a details view panel be customized with it? The example of the panel configuration can be seen on the right side in the picture shown. As you can see, there are different options to be configured. Let's start with dividing them to logical parts. In the picture in the middle, you can see that the panel configuration consists of 3 parts. First of them, control options, where we can, for example, define the identifier needed by the merging mechanism or the visibility. Next, there is a details navigation menu where we can define the properties for how the details menu will look. So there is the possibility to define the label, the icon, the tooltip, the display order. The last part is about the details view panel. Here we define which panel will be shown. When we click on the item in the details navigation menu, or if the panel should contain a virtual section, or how the table will be presented. For example, which objects it should contain, which columns to show, and so on. Now, when we are familiar with the theory, let's dive into the demo showing few customizations in action. At the beginning, let's see the prepared MidPoint environment. There are a few archetypes and object collections configured. So let's log into MidPoint as administrator and look at the details of some users. For example, let's look at the Harry Potter. After opening the details, we can see the standard object details page with the standard details navigation menu, basic panel, action buttons, and so on. When we look at another user, for example, we open Albus Dumbledore, we can see the same details navigation menu and the same basic panel. So let's start with first example where we will show how to customize the summary panel for students. Again, let's open Harry Potter. Now we can see the standard summary panel with the user full name and organization assignment. Now we want to customize the summary panel for the student. So we will do our modifications in the student archetype and in the section with admin GUI configuration and object details, telling that we want this customization apply for the user type. We add the summary panel structure where we define that for display name, we want to show prefix student with the full name, and as an identifier, which was by default the login, we want to see for which Quidditch teams the student is playing. As a title, we will use the application login, and as an organization, we will show at which faculty the student is studying. So let's apply these modifications and go back to MidPoint. As these changes were made in archetype, we don't need to relog into MidPoint, just refresh. After refreshing, we see that the summary panel was changed. Now we can see the result of our script. So we can see student Harry Potter, that he plays for Quidditch Gryffindor, that he studied at Gryffindor faculty, and his application login is Harry Potter. We saw the possibility to adapt the labels in summary panel for different users. It is now displaying values more important for us. The next use case is about showing how to categorize the basic attributes of the user virtual sections. We will do it at the global level, therefore our customizations will be in system configuration object. We are going to create two virtual sections for basic user panel. First of them with the name personal data, containing attributes like username, full name, and so on. And the second virtual section will be called contact and will contain all the information about how the user can be contacted. In this case, it will be an email address and telephone number. So these are now details of the student Harry Potter, and we saw before that the same is shown for the teacher of Albus Dumbledore. So let's make the modification. They will be at the global level. So, and with this modification in the system configuration object, we tell that we want the customization for the details page of the user. And here we say that at the basic panel, we want to add two virtual sections, one first and second. And here we say that for this virtual section, we want to display label personal data, and it will contain attributes name, given name, family name, and so on. And our second virtual section will have label contact and will contain attributes email address and telephone number. So let's upload our changes. And let's log in to MidPoint again as an administrator. And now, when we look, for example, at the Albus Dumbledore, we can see that two new virtual sections were added to the basic panel as we defined in the system configuration. So there is a personal data and contact. When we open the student, let's say again, Harry Potter, we can see that the same virtual sections were added to basic panel for the student. So we see personal data and contact information. In this example, we've shown how to use the virtual sections on global level, customizing basic panel for users in system configuration object. In the next example, we will show how the global configuration might be overridden in archetypes. We will create another virtual section for basic user panel. The definition of the attributes which belongs to the virtual section will be in system configuration object. However, the label for this virtual section will be defined in the student and teacher archetypes. So here we can see 3 sections, and let's make the customizations. So as I mentioned, we will do the virtual section at the global level. So again, in the system configuration object, this section will have identifier student teacher information and will contain attributes employee number, cost center organization, and organizational unit. You can see that we didn't display, we didn't define display name here because we will do it in the archetypes directly. So first we will do it for the teacher archetype, where we tell that, again, for the details page of the user at the basic panel and for the virtual section identified with student teacher information value, we will add display name teacher information. The same we will do for the students. So at the basic panel, again, for the virtual section with identifier student teacher information, we will add label student information. So let's upload all the changes. And let's go back to MidPoint. As the changes were also in system configuration, we need to relog in again. Let's see the details of the Albus Dumbledore now. And now we see that the new virtual section was added with the label teacher information. We can see defined attributes here as we defined in our customization. When we open the student, again, we will use Harry Potter to be consistent. And when we open the details, we now see also the same virtual sections as before, and one more with the label student information. With this example, we've shown the basic principle of overriding the configuration using archetypes. When displaying the basic properties of the student, we see student information virtual section, but when displaying the basic properties of the teacher, we see the teacher virtual section. Both of them contain the same attributes, but have different labels. Another example related to the basic users panel is going to demonstrate how the virtual section can be hidden. It is especially useful for overriding default system-defined settings. In our case, after we categorize the attributes for students, we no longer need to show others listed under the properties. So let's hide them. We are going to hide these properties for the students. Since we are going to hide them only for students, we will do it directly in the student archetype, where we define, again, for the basic panel, we want the container matching the pad, in this case, empty pad, to be invisible. Let's upload the configuration and let's look at the changes in MidPoint. So now we just need to refresh the view, and we see that the properties were hidden. As we shown in the example, since 4.4, it is possible to show or hide different virtual sections. It is also possible to override the default behavior, as we did in our example. Sometimes there is a situation that your virtual sections or any default sections are too long, containing too many attributes. However, you might not be interested to see them by default because they are not very important for you or you have any other reason. Since MidPoint 4.4, you can collapse such sections by default, which is our next use case to be shown. So we will collapse contact information and student information for end users. When we look into the MidPoint as an end user, for example, as Harry Potter, and go to his profile, we can see the same details panel with the same virtual section as we saw as administrator. And now we are going to collapse those. So here, again, for the object details page of user, we define that at the panel basic, we want the virtual section with identifier student teacher information to be collapsed by default, and also the contact information virtual section to be collapsed by default. Let's apply the changes and let's log into MidPoint again as a Harry Potter. Now, when we open the details of Harry Potter, we can see that the contact and student information are collapsed by default. Such a use case might be useful for your structures when the information they hold is not so important by default. Our next example will demonstrate how to factor out virtual sections and display them as separated menu items in Details navigation menu. We will do it for contact information and personal data, but only for teachers. So first, let's look into the MidPoint, log in as an administrator, and let's open the details of teacher Albus Dumbledore. And here we can see 4 virtual sections. And now what we are going to do is to factor out this personal data and contact data and put it here to the Details navigation menu. We do it for the employees. First of all, since before we define these virtual sections at the global level, we need to override the settings in the archetype. So here we tell that the basic panel, the virtual section with identifier personal information should be hidden, and also the contact information should be hidden from this basic panel. The second step we need to do is to make this panel as a separated panel configuration, so they will be shown in the Details navigation menu. So here we define a new panel with the identifier personal information panel, which in the Details navigation menu will be displayed with the label personal data and the icon of the address card. It will be displayed at the top of the Details navigation menu. And as a panel type, so the structure, how it will be presented, we use the form panel, which represents the formular. And here we again define the virtual sections with the label personal data containing all those attributes. There is the second panel configuration for the contact information. So in the menu, Details navigation menu, we will see menu item with label contact, an icon of phone, and it will be under the personal data menu item. We will use the same form panel, and we will have there one section with contact information such as email address and telephone number. So let's upload it to MidPoint. And let's refresh the details of the Albus Dumbledore. We can now see that the basic panel was changed, and now there are only two virtual sections, and that the two menu items were added to the details navigation menu. The personal data with the attributes specified for our virtual section, and contact information containing email and telephone number. This might be to quickly navigate your users to specific information. As we saw in our example, we factored out personal data and contact information. Now, when we factored out contact information and personal data to separated menu items in details navigation menu, and especially after we added the personal data at the top of the details navigation menu, it might be also useful to mark the personal data panel as the default. Ready to see how? So what we are going to do now is, when we open the details of the Albus Dumbledore now, it's still pointing to the basic panel to be shown as default. And now we want to change it. So the first menu item in the details navigation menu will be the default one. We need to do the changes at two places. First of all, as the basic panel is the default panel, which is like pre-configured by MidPoint, we need to set it to false to let MidPoint know that to not consider this one as a basic. And now we need our personal data new panel to make them default. After applying the changes and reopening the Albus Dumbledore again, we can now see that our default panel was changed. And now when we open the details of the Albus Dumbledore, we can see personal data. Sometimes it is hard to estimate what will be the most important to show to the user at first. Therefore, there is this option to override the default behavior and point the user to your most important information. All these examples were mostly about customizing the basic user panel and adapting the details navigation menu to your requirements. Another set of examples will be mainly about customizing assignments view. Let's start with the first of them, with adding new menu item faculty for assignments for students. So when we open the student, for example, Harry Potter again, and look at the details navigation menu, we can see assignment here. After opening, there is a submenu containing all the default kinds of assignments, roles, services, and so on. What we are going to do now is to add a new menu item here under the assignments menu and filter these assignments with custom filter. So we are going to do it for the students, where we define that for the panel assignments, we want another sub-panel, so it will be shown in the details navigation menu as a sub-menu of the assignments. We want to add new item with the label faculty and icon of bank, and it should be displayed at the top of this list of submenu. We will use the pre-configured panel type org assignments, which is shipped by MidPoint, and we will use our custom collection view for filtering the assignments. In this object collection, we say that filter all such assignments with the subtype set to faculty. So let's upload our changes and let's do the refresh of the details for student Harry Potter. Now, when we open the assignments menu, we can see that the new menu item was added with the name faculty. And we can see the faculty where the student is studying, as we can also see in his summary panel. This example can be useful for deployments with many assignments. If you have any key according to which you can categorize your assignments, you can split them to logical groups and make the navigation easier. Let's say you want new categories for assignments, but you don't want to add them under the assignments menu item. You want to add it to the main navigation menu at the same level as basic, activation, or projections. How to do it? So now we are going to make customization for the teacher, but we are not going to add the menu items under the assignments menu, but we are going to add the new menu items here at the tab level of the details navigation menu. When we open the employee archetype, you can see here and here prepared configuration. So we are going to add two new menu items. One which will be displayed in the details navigation menu under this one actually. So the one of them will have a display name set to classes, and we will use the book icon, and we will use panel type role assignments, which is also one shipped with MidPoint, and we will use again custom collection views for filtering. When we look into the collection, we can see that now we are going to filter all the assignments with subtype set to class. And the second menu we are going to add is about displaying organizational units where the user belongs to. So the label we use is organizational unit. We will show it under the basic menu item. We will use the custom icon, and we will also use the custom collection where we will filter all assignments with subtype org3. So let's upload our changes and let's refresh the details of the Albus Dumbledore. After refreshing, we can see that nothing was added here under the assignments, but we have two new menu items here. One showing the organizational unit where the user belongs to, so we can see where he belongs, and the classes the teacher teaches. In this case, Albus Dumbledore doesn't teach any class. I can imagine such situation for end users when you don't want to bother the end users with technical terms like assignments, and you don't want to overwhelm the end user with all the information. Still, speaking about the end users and looking at the table showing to which organizational unit the user belongs to, there is a lot of technical information which might not be very clear for them. So let's change the columns shown for teachers for organizational units. When we look now at the configuration we have, this is the basic panel shown for all organizational assignments, having information like identifier or relation, which might not be very clear for end users. So now we will show how we can customize such view. We will do it in our prepared object collection views for organizational unit, where we filter all assignments with subtype org3. Now we are going to add custom columns. As we can see, there will be 3 columns. First of them with the name of the organizational unit. Then the second column showing if the user is a manager of the organizational unit, and the last one pointing if the assignment is still active. Okay, let's upload the configuration. Let's go back to MidPoint, refresh the view, and we can see that the table was adjusted and our custom defined columns were used. Well, you can do this if you don't want to show the technical information to your users. The columns and their content is only up to you. Or, for example, hide the whole assignments menu for end users, as in the next example. So now we are going to demonstrate how the menu can be customized. For example, we will use Harry Potter as our example, and after looking at the details, we can see that the menu is still pretty long. There is this assignment menu with the whole submenu, and we are now going to hide this assignment menu. We are going to do it for end users, where we again define that the panel with identifier assignments should be hidden. So all its children will be hidden. Let's upload the configuration. Let's go back to MidPoint and log in as Harry Potter. After looking into the profile now, there are no assignments in menu, details navigation menu anymore. I partially mentioned similar use case before. Maybe the end users don't need to see all the assignments and the whole assignment submenu to not be confused. They might not be interested in roles, organizations, or services assigned. They need to know to which applications they have access. A few minutes ago, we added new menu item for class to main navigation menu. We did it for the teacher archetype, so when opening details of every user who is the teacher, we will see the classes menu item. But what if we don't want to show it for each teacher? What if we want different behavior for teachers while logged in as administrator and different behavior while logged in as approver? Let's see how to do something like this. So what we are going to do is for the approver, for example, Cornelius Fudge, in our example, we are going to hide classes, assignments, and we will show only the classes he owns. So for role approver, we again specify admin GUI configuration, and we specify that we want the customization for details page of user type, and we want to add new panel with identifier class assignments owner. In the details navigation menu, it will be shown as own classes. We will use again book icon, and we will place at the same place it, and we are using again role assignments panel and our custom collection, where we define our custom filter to filter all assignments with subtype class, and target ref, which has relation set to owner. The second thing we want for the approver is to hide class assignments, as it is not important to show them to them. So we do the same magic as we did before. When we upload the changes and go back to MidPoint and re-log in as Cornelius Fudge, open the profile, we now see that we have still organizational unit, and now we see on classes, but we don't see classes. When we log into MidPoint as administrator and open the details for Cornelius Fudge, here we see the organizational unit and classes, and we don't see on classes. This was an example demonstrating another aspect of merging mechanism and using power of possibilities to define graphical user interface customization different objects. As we saw for Cornelius Fudge while logged in as Cornelius while the role approver, he didn't see the classes assignments, but rather on classes assignments. But when looking at the same Cornelius Fudge logged in as an administrator, we saw classes assignments, but didn't see the on classes assignments. To show also possibility to customize the columns shown the table directly in panel configuration and not bothering with object collection view configuration, in the next example, we will change the columns for the on classes. So we will do it again for the role approver. And we will customize the view for the on classes panel. Here we define that we want to show only two custom columns. One showing the name of the class, which is owned by user. And the second one showing if the class is requestable, so other teachers can request to teach the class. Okay, let's upload the configuration. And now when we log in back to MidPoint as Cornelius Fudge and go to its profile, opening on classes, we can see just two columns. First of them showing the name of the class he owns, and the second one showing if this class is requestable. As we saw in our example and example before, while customizing columns for organizational unit assignments, there is also flexible possibility to customize the table view. You can either put your customization to object collection view, which can be then used by other features in MidPoint, for example, reports, or if it is one-time case, you can place it directly to the panel configuration. So far, we saw different options for customization, mainly around the basic panel and assignments panel. But since MidPoint 4.4, some customizations for projections can be also done. Let's see them and start with the basic one, categorizing attributes for LDAP account to virtual sections. So first, when we log into MidPoint as administrator and open, for example, teacher Albus Dumbledore, going to his projections and opening the LDAP projections, we can see this attribute section, which is, after showing also empty ones, pretty long. So now we are going to make some virtual sections for these attributes. We will do it at the global level. With the structure newly added in 4.4, which is called shadow details page. So in this case, you don't need to specify the type because the type is implicit from the name that it relates to shadow details page. But what is important here and different, and what is the difference between shadow details page and object details page configuration is that for the shadows, we need to specify on which resource we expect the shadow will be, and also the couple kind intent. Because as you probably know, this kind intent is later translated to object class, and each object class can have different attributes. So we need to somehow know which kind of account or shadow we can expect here and on which resource. So when we look at our configuration, it's pretty much the same what we see before. So here we define that at the panel shadow basic, we want 2 virtual sections, 1 second, and the first of them will have a display name set to personal data, and it will contain attributes like UID, given name, common name, surname, distinguished name, and so on. As you probably notice, you have to put the full name here, always. And the second virtual section for shadow, in our case, for the shadow pointing to the account on LDAP server, we will have a virtual section called contact with attributes like mail, telephone number, and so on. So let's upload the configuration. Let's log into MidPoint. Open the details again of the Albus Dumbledore, go to the projection on LDAP, and now we can see that 2 new virtual sections were added here. What do you think? Powerful, right? Suddenly, there is a system in all those attributes. And what might be even better? Of course, the possibility to hide the default attribute section. So let's do it. Now we are going to hide these attributes, as if we show also empty ones, it's still pretty long and we don't need to show them to users. So let's hide them. We will use the same magic as we did with the basic properties for students. Here we define that we want the section matching the path attribute to be hidden. Let's upload the configuration, go back to MidPoint, re-log in. And open the Albus Dumbledore again, projection details. And now we see that there are no attributes displayed anymore. Well, of course, nothing comes without the limits. And with shadow customizations, there is a limitation as well. The limitation is about the possibility to define the customizations only at the global level, so in the system configuration object. Before we end, let's see 2 more examples in action. One with the overriding default behavior, where we will change the label for cases to pending requests, and another example for hiding menu items which we don't consider as useful to show to end users. So we will change the label of these cases to pending request for the teachers, and we will also customize the end user details navigation menu. First of all, let's change this. So in the user teacher archetype for the panel focus cases, we want to override default label, which is cases, to pending request. And we will also add our custom column representing shopping basket. The second change we want to do is to adapt details menu for end users, where we mainly are going to make invisible the default panels, and we will rename the projections panel to accounts, which is probably more understandable for end users. So let's upload the customizations. Go back to MidPoint. Now, if we refresh, as this one change was in archetype, when we refresh Albus Dumbledore, now we see that there are no cases displayed anymore, but we see pending requests. When we now log into MidPoint as end user, for example, as a Harry Potter, and go to profile, we see that the menu was adjusted and is much shorter than it was. It is showing only few basic panels. So we will see basic panel, accounts panel, and cases. If we now log into MidPoint as another end user, for example, Albus Dumbledore, and go to his profile, we can see that the menu is a little bit longer because we made these customizations for the archetype teacher. And we also see that the account and pending operations requests were renamed here. And last, we will show the Cornelius Fudge, who is end user and also approver. He has the pretty same details navigation menu as Albus Dumbledore, with one difference that he doesn't see classes assignments, but rather on classes assignments. Voila, we did it. We customized MidPoint graphical user interface, and now it fits our needs better. Be brave and try it as well. To wrap up our webinar, I want to remind you that there were few changes. The biggest change is probably related to change design in MidPoint 4.4, where we moved from tabs to details navigation menu. There is still possibility to switch the graphical user interface back to the old design with setting use new design false in admin GUI configuration part, but I would strongly recommend not to do it and migrate your customization if you had any to new graphical representation. Remember that the identifier attribute is mandatory because now it is used by the merging mechanism. In case you don't have this attribute defined, MidPoint will probably complain, so you will have to do it eventually. Also, there is a change in merging behavior, because before, when you had any customization for a graphical user interface, they were considered as the ones they will present it to user. But since MidPoint 4.4, they are merged together with the default configurations coming with MidPoint. Also, these customizations and rework design was made under the project MidScale, which was funded by the European Union Horizon 2020 research. So we thank you very much for this funding. And if you are interested in detailed documentation about the GUI customization, you can always look at the documentation available at docs.evolveum.com. There will be one more webinar led by my colleague Lukáš Škublik. This webinar will be about native reports as we deprecated and then removed the support of Jasper reporting. And don't forget that there were also previous webinars which are now available at our YouTube channel, so you can always subscribe there and watch them later. Thank you very much for your time. See more details at docs.evolveum.com, and Also, if you want, you can still follow us on all our social media for further information. Thank you. If you have any questions, now you can ask.